Don't shoot, she said. I know the sound of a man who doesn't want to kill. The canyon was bleeding shadow when Jace Calder brought his mare to a stumbling halt. The horse's flanks heaved with foam the color of old bone. Blood ran warm down his left side, beneath a torn coat where a rifle slug had opened a furrow along his ribs. He could feel each heartbeat push the wet heat over the bandage he'd tied 3 miles back with a strip torn from his own shirt. The cabin crouched against the far wall of the canyon like a man trying not to be seen. Sod roof. Half a door. A thin thread of smoke from its chimney, though the day was warm. Jace had heard of cabins like this. Preachers' missions. Widows' shelters. Places where the forgotten went to be a little more forgotten. He hadn't meant to stop. He'd meant to keep east toward the canyon pass and on into the territories, where a man could trade his name for a new one for the price of a 6-month wage and a steady hand. But the blood kept running, and the mare kept stumbling, and somewhere behind him men were riding. Men who carried a warrant with a name on it that was almost his. Almost. So when he saw the cabin, he thought only of water, of a wall to put his back against while he stopped bleeding. He didn't think of the woman. She stood in the door the way a deer stands in a meadow, uncertain, folding her weight backward. Her eyes were pale milk and did not move. A cane of pale birch leaned across her palm. She wore a dress the color of pressed sage, and her hair was cut short to the jaw, as if someone had done it for heat or for grief. Don't shoot, she said again. Her voice was low, almost soft, but with a steadiness that surprised him. Your breathing is wrong. You're hurt, and your horse is worse. Jace's hand stilled on the colt. He'd been ready to draw on Shadow, but there was no gun in her hand. Only the birch cane and the pale smoke of the stove behind her. I ain't here to rob you, he said. I didn't ask what you came for. I told you what I heard. He sat still for a long moment. The canyon was silent except for the small things, the rustle of a hawk in the cottonwoods, the creek slipping over a stone, the ticking of his own pulse at the edges of his vision. How do you know the sound of a man who doesn't want to kill? He asked. She tilted her head. Because I have heard the sound of men who do. Yours isn't the same. You've got no joy in your hand. He dismounted. A stupid thing to do. The Colt sat heavy in his holster, and his eyes said he should stay on the horse. But the mare couldn't move, and the woman hadn't flinched. A jug of water under the lip, she said. He found it. The jug was warm where the sun had struck it. He washed his side, bit down on a folded piece of leather, and began to bind the wound with the clean cloth she handed him across the threshold. Her fingers were calloused at the tips, the way a fiddler are, or a reader's. Where are you from? He asked. Here, she said. 3 winters. Before that, the mission down by Fort Lewis. Before that, a town I will not name. There's a man buried in that town, and I do not care to speak of the kind of dirt they're lying in. He nodded. He didn't push. He sat with her silence the way a man sits with a fire, careful of it. What's your name? She asked. Jace. You said that like it isn't yours. Maybe it isn't. Hawk's shadow crossed the dust. The smoke from her chimney thinned, broke, and reformed. He thought, I have less than a day. When those men come, they will not ask a blind woman whether she saw me here. You planning to keep riding east? She asked. Yep. You won't make it. He looked at her. She didn't look back. She couldn't. But her head turned toward him as if she could feel the question in his eyes. You're wounded worse than you know, she said. Your horse won't see sundown. And you've got the wind of someone at your back who's been riding a long time on purpose. I can hear the difference. A man chasing a thing is louder than a man looking for a thing. How do you hear that? My father was a preacher. He told me God gave me something even though he took something. I don't know if I believe him. I believe in the wind. She stepped aside from the door. Only a half step. The door was too narrow. Come in, she said. Eat what I have. I'll bind the wound proper. And I'll tell you one thing about who's coming. Then you do what you want to do with it. He hesitated. Bring your gun in if it helps you, she said. But it won't. Not against what's coming for you. He brought the gun in. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine resin, dried sage, and the low salt smell of iron where she'd been working a knife. A wooden cross hung above a shelf of books, well thumbed, the bindings cracked. A small iron stove glowed at the corner, and on it a kettle was whispering. She set a tin plate in front of him, beans, a heel of bread, water from the jug. He ate slowly, watching her move. She kept her left hand always on the wall, always knowing where she was in the room. When she crossed to the stove, She took 3 measured steps and stopped an inch from the kettle without touching it, the way a man knows the distance to his own fence post. "You got a name?" he asked. "Marin." "Marin what?" "Marin Halloran. Marin Tate. Until I was 11. My father married again. The second husband was a kinder man than the first. The first was the man who built the mission down by Fort Lewis. The first killed my mother, then made me into this, then wrote a letter to a church board explaining all the prayers he had answered. He said nothing. He recognized the shape of the story the way a man recognizes the shape of a storm by the light. "You said you'd tell me one thing," he said. "Who's coming?" She sat down across from him, cane against her knee. "A man named Harlan Tate," she said. "He carries a tin star. He wears it on the left side, the way my stepfather did." "You're saying the man hunting me is your stepfather?" "No. I'm saying he stole the name, the star, and maybe the man. I'm saying I heard him once only, 3 winters back, talk to a cattleman at the river ford about a string of bank jobs north of Laramie, jobs blamed on a man named Jace Calder. I'm saying the cattleman laughed and said, 'He's been dead a year.' And I'm saying Harlan said, 'Not for another week he isn't, and I'm the one who's going to prove it.'" The cabin was quiet. The kettle whispered, "You're telling me," Jace said carefully, "that he's not hunting me for what I've done. He's hunting me for what I haven't done." "Yes. And he's using my name to hide his own." "There's a difference between a thing you have heard and a thing you have proven," she said. "I have the ears of a fox. I don't have the eyes of a court. You could have refused to tell me. I could have. Why didn't you?" "Because you came to my door breathing the way a man breathes when he is trying not to die. And because I watched you leave the gun on the table before you sat down." She hesitated. "I'm not a good judge of men, but I'm not a bad one, either. And you did something I've not seen in a long time. You listened. Even before I had a chance to talk, you listened with the hand." He felt the weight of the decision then. Cold wind through a loose board. He had coming riders. A mare that couldn't go. A woman who had given him a thing worth more than a clean shot. She had given him a name and a doubt. He had come into this canyon planning to die quietly. She was a footnote in those farewells. Now she was the only person in 100 miles who had given him a truth. "You need to leave," she said. "I know. Your horse needs to leave more than you." He pushed back from the table. The colt lay beside his plate. He thought about picking it up and found that he didn't. "There's a stand of rocks 2 miles east," she said. "A place where the canyon narrows. There is a runoff gully, dry now, that runs back south toward Fort Lewis. If your horse can make the rocks, the gully will hide you from the road. They cannot find an ear they cannot hear. And you?" "I'll stay. They'll come here." "They won't. The road runs a half-mile west of the door. If you go out the back way, south, you leave no track on their road. If I keep my fire smoking, they will hear a woman inside and ride on. What if they don't? Then I will be the liar that day." She lifted the cane. "I have been a liar before." He buckled his gun belt. He took up the mare. "Marin." "Yes. When this is over, if I live through it, I will come back this way." "Men say that." "Then don't be a man who says it. Be a man who does it." He went out the back of the cabin. The canyon lay empty in the late gold of the day. He did not look back. He knew the cabin was a small thing in the canyon wall. He knew his coming had not saved her, but had put her in the way. And he carried that weight into the cut of the rocks, where the wind ran colder and the light thinned. The rocks hit him the way she had said. The gully opened to the south like a wound in the canyon wall, dry and stony. He dismounted where the walls leaned in toward each other, almost touching overhead. He tied the mare to a snag of cedar, and he lay down on his back on the cold stone, and he waited. He waited through the slow slide of the afternoon, when the shadows came down like a hand closing. He waited through the wind that came up just before dusk, smelling of dust and the iron of distant rain. Then he heard them. Marin had been right. A man chasing a thing is louder than a man looking for a thing. The hoofbeats had the cadence of certainty, fast, stupid, certain. He counted. 4 horses, then 3. One had peeled off south. The remaining 3 came on down the canyon toward her cabin. He closed his eyes. The blood in his bandaged side went hot and slow. He could go back out the way he had come in, swing wide to the east, cross the road a half-mile above the cabin, and keep riding. He had been told by every man he'd ever lived among that a man did not go back. A man who went back died, and the woman died, and nothing was changed. He opened his eyes. He thought of a thing that had happened 9 years earlier. He'd been 23, on the run from a job that had gone wrong in Sioux country. He'd come over a rise and seen a fellow traveler lying beside a buckboard with a busted wheel. "My son is in the wagon," the traveler had said. "Please." Jace had been out of his mind with fear, and the child had been asleep, and Jace had walked past. He had walked 100 yards before he stopped breathing, then turned, then walked back. The child's father had been a U.S. Marshal who'd recognized Jace's face in the moonlight. 2 years in a federal pen at Leavenworth. He'd gone on the run again the moment they let him out. He had not walked past a stranger since. The riders were almost at the cabin. He untied the mare. He did not swing up. He walked her out the way he had ridden in, back toward the cabin, his hand on her neck, his boots silent on the stone. At the mouth of the gully he paused. The cabin was a square of dark against the dimmer dark. The 3 riders silhouetted themselves against the low western sky, then pulled up short of the door. The lead rider called out, "Halloo the cabin." Marin's voice came from inside, calm as a bell struck. "There's a woman here, and a lame leg, and no husband this 11 years. What do you want?" "We want a man who passed this way. Dark hair, scar on the left side of his jaw, riding a horse with a blaze." "There's been no one." "You're lying, ma'am. The track's in the dust out front of your trough, fresh, with a mare that bleeds at the hoof. We'd know that horse anywhere." He had not known the mare bled at the hoof. Marin had. "Open the door," the man said. "You will not." The colt came out first, then the rider. He saw the tin star on the man's left breast catch a glint of the last light. Harlan Tate, younger than he'd expected. Behind Harlan, 2 men. "Ma'am," Harlan said, and his voice was thin and careful in a way the men Jace had known had never been. "We are duly authorized." "There's a rifle behind the door," she said, "and I know how to load it. The door stays closed." Jace saw the moment Harlan's hand twitched, saw the 2 men look at each other, saw the mountain wind push the cabin smoke down flat, so the cabin went dark. He stepped out of the gully and stood in the open. "So you're the sheep we're shearing," Jace said, from the horse's flank. The 3 riders swung toward him. Harlan's hand came up with the colt already drawn. "You walk a quiet trail for a man on the run," Harlan said. "Maybe I am now. Step out where I can see you proper." Jace stepped out. The wound at his side was pulling at every breath, but he held himself in a way that did not show it. "How many men you got back in the rocks, Calder?" "None. Just the mare." "Then you're a fool." "Maybe I am. I have been one before." Harlan studied him. The 2 behind him were not careful. One wore a bored expression and a bandage around his thumb. The other smelled faintly of peppermint. "Harlan," Jace said, "let's dispense." "Dispense? With what you're chasing?" "A bank job in Laramie, blamed on me. A man named Jace Calder. A warrant signed by a name I never made acquaintance with. A tin star on the left breast." Harlan did not blink. The man with the peppermint took his hand off his gun. "You want to be tried here," Harlan said. "You can be tried. We have 2 witnesses. You have 2 men who don't know my face. You've tracks on this very ground. You've a woman in that cabin who—" Harlan hesitated. The hesitation was everything. "Who has not seen me?" Jace said. "She'll tell you so, if you ask her right. But you'd best not ask her in a way that requires her lying, because the woman is not a liar in the customary sense, and you'd find yourself in a worse position than you're in now." The wind came through the canyon. Marin's voice came through the half-door. "Ask him his name," she said. "He will not give you the one you want." Harlan's face tightened. He asked, "What name do you go by, friend?" "Jace. Just Jace." "Just Jace will not hold up in front of a magistrate." "No, but the false one will not, either. There is no man called Calder in Laramie. There is no man called Calder in this canyon." Harlan hesitated again, longer this time. "You came out of the rocks," he said, "when you could have ridden on." "What?" "Because you were at a woman's door." "You came back for a stranger?" "For a witness." The man with the peppermint laughed once, then stopped. Harlan's eyes narrowed. "What witness?" he said. Jace looked at the half-door. He looked at the birch cane in Marin's hand. "The one inside. She heard you." "Heard me what?" "She heard you at the river ford, talking to a cattleman. 3 winters back. She heard you say a name that wasn't mine. She heard you say where the gold was. She heard you explain how the badge stayed clean. The cabin was very still. The mare against the trough blew once. The wind died." "She is blind," Harlan said slowly. "She could not have seen me. She did not see you. She heard your voice." She hears voices the way most men see faces. And once she has a voice, she has it the way a man has a scar. Forever. Harlan's eyes went to the half door, to where Jace stood, to the two men behind him. She can identify a cattleman, and a bank job, and a stolen warrant. She can, Jace said. And she'll do so to a court that does not pretend it can't hear. The trouble with you, Harlan, is that you rode here sure of your warrant, and now you are not sure of your name. The wind came up again. Marin's voice came from inside the door. I will repeat the words I heard, she said, to whatever court will hear them. I will say who spoke them. I will say what they said about the gold. And I will say that I am blind, and that I have been listening for that voice for 3 winters while I sat and waited to be sure I would not accuse the wrong man. The peppermint man took his hand off his holster. He looked at Harlan. The man with the bandage looked at Harlan. Harlan turned his horse. We're going, he said. We're going, Jace said. Without the witness. And without you. We'll ride east together, Jace said. We will, won't we, boys? The peppermint man touched his hat brim to Jace. The man with the bandage touched his hat brim. They turned their horses. Harlan's hand was shaking on the reins. They went. The sound of the hooves died. The smoke from the cabin chimney found the sky again. Jace turned back to the cabin. Marin was standing in the door when he came up. The birch cane was at her shoulder. Her free hand rested on the door frame the way a hand rests when it has been holding on to a thing for the better part of an hour. They're gone, she said. Both of his men turned. They didn't trust the math anymore. You came back. I came back. She made a small noise, not quite a laugh. I had decided to be the liar if I had to be. I was prepared for it. But you weren't. No. She let the cane drop into her hand. I wasn't. Come in. Sit. Let me see the wound. I told you you can't see. I know what the heat feels like when it's going bad. A wound that's warm to the touch, with stickiness at the edges, is one thing. A wound that's cold at the center is another. Sit down. He sat. She unwrapped his bandage and listened to his breath while she cleaned the wound. She was right, and he was surprised, and she laughed at him for being surprised. It had been 9 years since he had laughed at a woman in his own company. There's a thing I haven't told you, he said. So have I? You first. No, you. He looked at her. Her head turned toward the corner of the room, where the iron stove glowed, and she said carefully, There's a man buried in this canyon, in the rocks, 2 miles south of where you tied your mare. His name is Caleb Tate. He was my brother. He was 21. He was deaf, not blind, but the principle applied. He heard too much when he shouldn't have. He heard something my stepfather said in a tent at Fort Lewis in the summer of '74. He came up here to die. I buried him. Jace did not speak. Harlan is the man who gave my stepfather the job, she said. Harlan is the man who came out to the canyon the next spring and made sure the grave was dug deep. I'm not a vengeful woman, Jace. But I'm not a forgetful one, either. You've been sitting on this for how long? 3 winters. Then what do you want? Quash the warrant. Put Harlan's name on the docket at Fort Lewis. Let whoever rode with him tonight know that the witness they didn't burn is still breathing. And let me send a letter this winter to a circuit judge I know, who married my mother. He nodded. I can make 3 of those 4. Which one can't you make? I can't ride east. I've been running east for 9 years, and I've decided east is the wrong direction. Where then? South, to the circuit judge. Then north, to the territory seat. Then east, but slowly. Slowly enough that I can come back through this canyon when the seasons turn. You'll come back? I told you. I'm not a man who says a thing and does not do it. She laughed the small laugh again. They spent 3 days in the cabin. She rebound the wound. She fed him broth. She read him passages from the shelf of books. She told him stories she'd carried alone for 3 winters. On the second night, she asked if she could describe his face to herself, and he sat very still while her fingers moved from his brow to his jaw, reading him the way she read the rest of the world, by heat, by break, by the place where the skin had once been cut. The scar is on the right side, not the left, she said. I lied. Harlan lied. Why? Because Laramie's warrant said the left. He was matching his warrant. Was he wearing it for the bounty or for the cover? Both. He went south on the 4th morning. He carried the Colt at his hip, unbuttoned. He carried, inside his coat, a brass button from the coat of Caleb Tate the brother, given to him that morning at the door by Marin, who'd kept it in a tin box for 3 winters. He carried it the way a man carries a thing he intends to bring back. In Fort Lewis, the circuit judge listened. The witnesses were few: an old cattleman who'd talked too much at a river ford and who'd traveled a long way to be at the docket. The peppermint man, whose real name was Tom Lander, came in from the north and signed a paper. The man with the bandage did not come at all. The warrant was quashed. Harlan's name went on the docket. The court said no more about the gold. When the court rose, Jace took a room at the saloon end of town. He slept for 2 days. He drank water from a clean pitcher. On the third morning, he bought a bay mare from a cattleman who'd heard his name in the years past. He rode back to the canyon. 11 days. He found Marin at the cabin door. She was standing the way she'd been standing the first day, the cane at her shoulder, the smoke rising. There was a small garden behind the cabin now, where there had been none. There were 2 chairs on the porch where there had been one. "I knew you'd come back," she said. "I knew. I listened for your mare. I know her hoof by heart." He tied the bay and the old mare together at the trough. He took off his hat. He stepped up to the porch. "The garden's not much," she said. "It's enough for 2. They went in. Epilogue. Years later, when riders passed the old mission on the road to Fort Lewis, they sometimes saw an old man at the forge in the next town over, hammering at a piece of iron he'd been hammering for half a season. He had a wife who could not see the iron, but who knew the sound of his hammer better than any of the townsfolk knew their own names. They had a son who could hear the difference between a man who didn't want to kill and a man who did, though he'd been told never to speak of it in company. The old man had the habit, when the wind came up out of the canyon, of stepping out of the forge and listening for a long time, until the wind died. He had the habit of putting his hand on the table when he sat to eat, the way he had the first day he'd come to the cabin door. If you asked him about the brass button he kept in a tin box on his wife's shelf, he'd say it wasn't his to explain, and he'd put his hat on, and he'd go back to the iron. And if you asked his wife, she'd say only this: it was the wind that brought him. The wind, and the man breathing wrong at the door. That was the whole of it.